When I moved into my grandmother's old house, I didn't expect much more than a quiet retreat. Life in the city had become unbearable, and the idea of living in a secluded Victorian home at the edge of the woods was appealing. The house was weathered, its once white paint now peeling, and its wooden frame sagging under decades of neglect. But it was mine now. My first night there, I was struck by the quiet, not just the absence of traffic and city noise. It was as if the house itself muffled every sound, creating a vacuum of silence. Still, I convinced myself that this was what peace felt like. The second night, I heard the tapping. It started faintly, almost imperceptible against the creaks and groans of the old structure. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking tree branches against the walls, but the pattern was too regular, too deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. It seemed to come from beneath me. The basement had always been my least favorite part of the house. Even as a child, when my grandmother would let me visit, I avoided it. She'd warned me never to go down there, calling it her forbidden storage room. The few times I'd peeked, I'd seen little more than cobwebs, broken furniture, and darkness. When I finally mustered the courage to go down, I found nothing out of place. The basement was just as I remembered it, cold, damp, and filled with the smell of mildew. The tapping had stopped, leaving only the sound of my own breathing. But as I turned to head back upstairs, I saw them. Dark, smeared handprints along the ceiling beams. They were faint, but undeniable, as if someone had crawled along the underside of the floorboards, dragging their fingers. I froze, a chill crawling up my spine. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Old stains from some previous owner or a trick of the light, but something deep within me whispered otherwise. The following nights, the tapping grew louder. It started precisely at midnight, each knock measured, like someone was counting out a rhythm. Then came the whispers. They were faint at first, like a distant conversation just beyond the walls. I strained to hear, but the words were muffled, nonsensical. Yet the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate. I began to dread the hours after midnight, keeping every light in the house on and the TV playing softly, anything to drown out the sounds. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard something new. A soft scraping, like nails dragging along wood. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from the locked door beneath the staircase. The door had always intrigued me. Its iron latch was rusted shut, and the wood was scarred with deep scratches, as though something had tried to claw its way through. The locksmith had refused to touch it, muttering something about leaving. What's locked? Locked. But now, the sound of scraping and whispering behind it was unbearable. I grabbed a crowbar and pried the latch open. The door creaked, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. The air that seeped out was cold and heavy, carrying with it a putrid stench. Flashlight in hand, I descended, my heart hammering with every step. The walls of the tunnel were damp, lined with what looked like claw marks. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until I could almost make out words. At the end of the tunnel was a small, circular room. In the center lay an old wooden chest, its surface carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The air was thick with a sense of wrongness, and I hesitated before stepping closer. When I opened the chest, I found bones, human bones, arranged neatly as if someone had carefully placed them there. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. That's when I felt it. Cold, skeletal hands gripping my ankles. I screamed and kicked, breaking free and scrambling out of the tunnel. As I reached the basement, The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The house has been quiet since that night. The tapping has stopped, the whispers silenced. But sometimes, when I walk past the staircase, I swear I hear breathing. The lake house wasn't just a property, it was a legacy. My father had spent countless summers there, and as a child, I'd run barefoot along its wooden floors, chased dragonflies by the shore, and watched the stars reflect on the glassy surface of the lake. When he passed away, the house came to me, and with it, a lifetime of memories that felt as heavy as the keys in my hand. Winter was the only time I could take leave from work to visit. It wasn't the season the lake house thrived in. The frozen lake and snow-covered woods felt a world apart from the vibrant greens and blues of summer. But it was the perfect time for me to go through his belongings and decide what to do with the place. The first few days were uneventful. I spent them unpacking boxes and sifting through old furniture, discovering forgotten relics of my childhood, board games, fishing rods, and my father's collection of vinyl records. The evenings were quieter, almost oppressively so. Without the familiar hum of city life, the silence of the lake house was deafening. On the second night, while rummaging through my father's study, I found the diary. It was tucked away in the back of an old desk drawer, its leather cover cracked with age. It wasn't my father's handwriting. This was old, the ink faded, and the penmanship looping and elegant. The diary belonged to Eleanor Graham, who lived in the house in the late 1800s. Her entries were typical at first, describing her idyllic life by the lake, her husband's fishing trips, and her love for the serene isolation of the woods. Then the tone shifted. "They've started appearing again," she wrote. "Figures on the lake. At first I thought they were fishermen, but they don't move. They only watch." Further entries became more frantic. Eleanor described how the figures would grow closer each night, stepping closer to the house as the days passed. I closed the curtains, but I can still feel their eyes. They're watching, waiting. The last entry was dated February 2nd, 1891. "They've come for me. If you find this, leave. Don't stay here. Don't look at them. Don't let them in." A shiver ran down my spine as I closed the diary. I told myself it was a story, a fragment of history that held no real danger. But that night, the silence of the lake house felt heavier. At midnight, I heard it for the first time, a faint tapping at the living room window. I froze in bed, straining to hear. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like someone knocking lightly on the glass. Slowly, I climbed out of bed and crept toward the sound. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued, insistent and patient. Summoning what courage I could, I pulled the curtain aside. Figures stood on the frozen lake. They were dark silhouettes, backlit by the pale glow of the moon. There were 5 of them, spaced evenly across the ice, and though I couldn't see their faces, I felt their gaze, piercing and unrelenting. I stepped back, letting the curtain fall. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Ice fishermen, I told myself. Maybe locals playing some prank. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I walked down to the shore, but the snow was untouched, pristine. No footprints, no evidence anyone had been there. That night, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder, and when I peered out the window, the figures were closer, standing at the edge of the lake. My stomach twisted as I realized their positions had shifted, no longer spaced evenly. They were clustered, their heads tilted as if staring directly at me. Over the following days, the weather worsened. Snowstorms cut off all roads leading out of the area, and my car refused to start. I was stranded. The figures came closer each night, their presence seeping into my dreams. I would wake drenched in sweat, the whispers from the diary haunting me. On the fifth night, I woke to a different sound, the unmistakable creak of footsteps on the wooden porch. I sat bolt upright, my breath visible in the freezing air. The house was unnaturally cold, and the tapping had grown frantic, coming from every window. Then came the whispers, soft, guttural murmurs that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. I grabbed the diary, desperate for answers. Eleanor had warned not to let them in, but she hadn't said how to stop them. Flipping through the pages, I noticed a passage I hadn't read before. They feed on attention. Do not acknowledge them. Do not give them your fear. The whispers grew louder, and the tapping turned to pounding. My resolve wavered as the front door rattled, the sound of splintering wood filling the room. I backed into the study, clutching the diary like a lifeline. And that's when I saw her. A woman stood in the corner, her hair a tangle of black curls that hid her face. Her dress was torn, her skin pale and cold as the air around her. She didn't move, but raised an arm, her finger pointing toward the window. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not looking." Her hand dropped, and the whispers stopped. For a moment, the house fell silent. Then the door burst open, and the cold night air rushed in, bringing with it the sound of cracking ice. I don't remember much after that. I must have run, though I don't recall leaving the house. I woke up miles away, lying in a snowbank at the side of a desolate road. When I told the authorities about the lake house, they said it had burned down. The fire was so intense that nothing remained but the foundation. They asked how I escaped, but I couldn't answer. Even now, I feel them watching. Every time I pass a window or hear the wind tap against the glass, I wonder if they've found me again. And I wonder if I'll ever escape.